So chapter 17 was job order costing, chapter 18 is process costing. If you remember, well, let me just follow the thing here. So first of all, the theme for this week apparently is a bottle cap. Each time I look at these, I think, where did they get that from? That's like, try this next side. You think, like, look at a product name. You ever heard of Hydrox cookies? They don't really have them anymore, I don't think, but when I was a kid, they were like the main competitor for Oreos. They look like an Oreo, they taste like an Oreo, but their name is Hydrox, which to me sounds like a dangerous chemical. And so, whenever you see a product name that you think is unusual or strange, do this. Picture like a boardroom with a bunch of guys in suits, guys and ladies wearing tweeds, looking nice, sitting around the boardroom table, and then the one person's making the pitch. Like, okay, I have it. Hydrox. And then picture all the other people like, yes, yeah, slow clap and everything. So next time you think of a weird product name, any weird product name, I don't know.
True Move.
What's that?
True Move.
True Move. Yeah, so somebody had to pitch that in a boardroom and get somebody to accept that as the product name. I'm always just like wondering, True Move is actually kind of cool. Like it's honest milk. It's not, there's no attitude. I like that. But you know, just any name, think of that. You know, think of them with like the Chevy Nova. Nova, with a star bursting or something. I don't know what Nova is, but it's amazing. And then like think about it. Yes. All right. Maybe that's not as cool to you as it is to me. The other thing I like to do is whenever I go to a restaurant, I like to start to try to calculate the cost of each food item. Well, no, I want to know what it costs them.
Oh, like what's costing them?
Yeah, so like I'm eating like a double cheeseburger. Remember when they were $1?
Yeah.
Or a McDouble? Yeah. And I started doing the math, like 2 patties of fake beef, the extra process. No, it's 100% beef.
And 100% lies.
And you start doing the math and you're like, there is not much margin in a McDouble. There's a reason they got bumped up.
Yeah, they put margarine in it?
Margin, profit margin in a McDouble. I actually have a friend who owns like 9 McDonald's, and he used to cry to me all the time about the McDouble for $1 thing. Like how it was killing him because it cost him like 96 cents or something. Well, he's okay.
6 cents.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, not everything was killing him. Just that product item was tough on his margin. And the sausage McMuffin for $1. Apparently, the sausage. So I used to go and I would buy like 2 McDoubles for lunch, no fries. There's a higher margin in fries because they're just potatoes. And there's a higher margin in soda. So no drink, no fries, 2 McDoubles, and then pay with an American Express because that is the highest card fees to them. And then ask for extra ketchup packets and a water cup. And then I would text him. They're like, bro, I think I just cost you 13 cents. And he'd be like, you suck. One time I did that, and I texted him, and like, he didn't respond. And so later I was like, how did you didn't respond? He's like, it was at my dad's funeral. I was like, oh, I'm sorry. He's like, no, he would have thought that was hilarious. Because his dad started the franchises and then sold them to him. Anyway, so there's another fun thing. See, business isn't just a waste. You can go and like try to calculate food costs. You can go and like walk around Walmart and like calculate the amount per hour they're paying people to do nothing. Like just start looking at their employees that are kind of avoiding work by wandering through and start calculating the hourly costs to them. Or better, this is really fun. Go to Walmart, walk up to a random associate, and then ask them for help finding something that you know is not in their department. So if they're like in the crafts department, ask them about like dog food and watch their response. It's hilarious. Some of them will be like, I'll check, and they'll walk off and never come back. That's a pretty good trick. Others will be super helpful. They'll actually like take you to it. Others will be like, I think it's over there somewhere. Anyway, it's kind of fun to realize that Walmart, because they pay minimum wage, most of them, they end up with a mixed bag of employees. Some who are really faithful regardless of how much they get paid. Some who are there just to fill the clock so that they can get paid, and then most of them somewhere in the middle, which is what most of us are, somewhere in the middle of those two. All right, I'll think of other fun business exercises for you. All right, so here's our learning objectives. Describe the flow of cost through a process costing system. Remember, the process costing system is the one that has, where they make a whole bunch of the same product. That's probably why they have a bottle cap. A bottling company is a good example. They just move those bottles through and fill them. Calculate equivalent units of production. That confuses people for direct materials and conversion costs. Prepare a production cost report using the weighted average method. Prepare a journal entry for the process costing system. Use a production cost report to make decisions. And then we won't be doing 6, which is in the appendix, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, we don't need to send
You don't even need it. It's like this weird party where you test it and like store bacteria. Anyway, I love the term one now. All right. So describe the flow of cost through a process costing system. Do you like how whenever I put on my microphone, I start using my radio voice?
Yeah.
That's like a natural thing. You just like, hi, I'm Rush Limbaugh. No, okay, wait. The only thing I like about him is his little catchphrase at the beginning of his fake commercials, but I can't listen to the rest of the show. What is it, like taking on the entire Democratic Party with one half of my brain tied behind my back, and things like that. I think that's funny, but that's fun. All right, but we're describing the flow of costs to a process costing system. I'm a little random today, I apologize. It is. All right, so how do costs flow through a process costing system? So remember in job order costing, we allocate the cost by job, and we use the companies that manufacture unique, it was used by companies that had like unique jobs, right? That was the thing we just did in the last chapter. So in a process costing system, instead of allocating the cost by job, we allocate them by process, or by steps in the process. I think the easiest way to think of this would be like by department. Think of something like potato chips, okay? Probably the raw materials for potato chips would be potatoes and oil, primarily salt.
And air.
And yeah, what'd you cry about? It's sold by weight. All right. Anyway.
Air has weight.
Almost. Okay, let's go. All right. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the raw materials. We're going to put them through some process. The first process might be cleaning and then peeling, right? And so there'll be raw materials added in, potatoes, and there'll be direct labor. Someone has to run even if it's a machine, someone has to run the cleaning machine and the peeling machine. I doubt it's a bunch of people with hairnets using peelers, like a lathe plant. I'm sure they have some automated process, right? After that, they'll move on to the second department. And that department might be the slicing department that slices them really thin, okay? So again, probably no additional raw materials added at that point, but there'll be additional labor added through a slicing process. Maybe the next process is a cooking process, so where they come in and they're fried in the vat. I don't know if you would call your oil a direct material cost or if you call it indirect material, and just say we just keep refilling the oil, but we're not going to try to track an amount for the whole stuff. And this process order thing is not as important, okay? So they're going to add oil at that point, then they're going to put them through an additional process of cooking them. Maybe then the next is some sort of a drying process, where it goes on a little conveyor and gets salted. Then there'll be, at each stage of the way, we're adding some material and some labor, and then at the end they're bagged, sealed, and shipped. Probably dropped into cases of 12 bags per box, something like that, okay? So instead of worrying about like each job, what we do is we just say we have a continuous process here. We're making the same thing all the way through, so let's transfer costs through the process, or through each stage of the job. So we'll have, in essence, what we'll do is we'll create these, there'll be multiple work in process inventory accounts. There'll be a work in process cleaning, work in process cooking, work in process, slicing, work in process cooking, work in process drying and salting, and then finished goods. Okay? And we'll transfer the costs through each one of those and add the costs in at each level. So what is a work in process in the cleaning will become the input after they've added that labor into the raw materials, will become the debit to the work in process in the slicing area. And then they'll add in that labor, and then they'll credit that account and debit the whole amount to the work in process and cooking area. and so forth. Just transfers those costs across until all the labor and materials are added in the finished goods cost at the end. Okay? So it's similar to the job order costing, but we worry about it by process rather than by job. All right. So here they give you a comparison of the two. I'm going to read that to you. Kind of everything I just said. Work in process inventory and the job order costing is a general ledger account. One general ledger account with a subsidiary ledger containing individual job cost sheets. Whereas in the process costing system, it's separate work in process inventory accounts for each process or department, which is what I just said. But yeah.
So how do they separate the processes? Like, do they do it by like one day of work, or like an hour, or?
So the periodicity assumption is what you're talking about. What do we call a period? How does it move from one to the other? When do we count how much we've moved from one department to another? Yeah. So in most modern manufacturing plants, what they do is they'll do that by a work day. Okay, they'll break that down into a shift, or sometimes it's like say 3 shifts in a work day if they're 24-hour operation. I promise you, lathe potato chips are working 24 hours to crank those chips out. Okay, so there's probably 3 shifts of people working 8-hour shifts. And so at the end of each shift, that shift supervisor is going to do some sort of entry. And a lot of it's bar-coded. Again, they just kind of scan it. So that they say this is the amount that we've moved on to the next department at the end of this shift. For things that are, say, a little bigger, okay, say like an automobile, then each automobile will have a unique identifier, so it's almost like job costing, even though it's still, so it just gets scanned, and so you know that that's moved on to the next department, okay? And so in real life, you end up with situations that are almost a blend of these two concepts. Because really, the great thing about managerial accounting is that there's not a set of rules that you have to follow because of some government regulator. This is your accounting to figure out your costs in the best way for your company. So if you have large units of something, then and each one has a unique identifier, then just as you add labor to it, and that's kind of a real, if you think about it, a real job order sort of situation. But they're not using those job order worksheets. Now it's all just kind of scanned in. I scan my employee number, I scan the job, I work on it. The process-based system, you're right, there has to be some sort of line where we say, okay, we're going to measure how much we've moved across up to now. This is usually by shift, because each shift has a different manager. And mostly each shift has a manager and accountant that works with the manager. You see that they're keeping things in check during that time. All right. And here we go, timing of cost transfers. This is kind of to your question, Sheila. For a job order costing system is when each job is completed, and for process costing system it says at the end of the accounting period. So that could vary by company and by what they're doing. Okay. Some things it's fine to even like only measure it like once a month. How much did we move from each thing? Other things you want to have almost an hourly update as to how much we're moving across so that you can track the processes in the system. Okay. Freeport-McMoran, think about it, they're a mining company. So think of the Stafford or the Morenci operation. I don't know how much you know of the process there. But in essence, what they do is they either blow up or dig up ore. They take that ore, they put it in a truck. The truck takes it over to what's called a crush and convey operation. So the ore is crushed down into like almost a powder. Then that ore is moved, that ore powder is moved to an electrowinning process area where they dissolve that powder in sulfuric acid. And so now you have what's called slurry, this sulfuric acid, partially dissolved ore mixture. And then they use these copper cathodes. Might be zinc anodes actually. Anyway, they put them down in there. They put a negative charge to it, so the anode, and then the copper molecules are attracted to that because they're positively charged, and they end up with these sheets of copper on either side of it. Pull that out, you have pure copper. You scrape those off of there with some process. They stack those up. They ship them out as copper, and then they sell that copper on the market. They're not in the process of making things with that copper. So Freeport-McMoran doesn't go and draw a wire. They just dig it out of the ground, separate the copper from the rest of the ore, and then they sell that copper to people. But they have to go through a process. And it's the same process over and over and over. They're not doing job orders, right? That would be process-based. So there's some examples. All right. So the flow of costs. Companies use process costing to determine the per unit cost in order to do all these things. Control costs, set selling prices, and calculate account balances for things all along the way. Work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold. All right. So in job order costing again, we saw that things flow through by job. Work in process, finished goods, cost of goods sold. In a process costing system, you have work in process inventory. In this case, this company, I don't know what they do, but they have a mixing department that flows into the work in process in the molding department, which flows into the work in process into the instead of the packaging department, which flows into finished goods, which then becomes cost of goods sold when they sell the product. So I think in my brain, process costing is more natural to me. It just flows through. At each stage, I'm adding material, adding labor, until at the end, I've got a total amount I spent making this thing. All right. So here's the part that I said gets a little confusing sometimes. It's the equivalent units of production. All right. So this is pretty basic, if you think about it. So the total costs incurred during a period in Department 1 will equal the total cost that we transfer to Department 2 plus the cost of any stuff still remaining in Department 1. Okay? So if we put materials and labor into what we're working on, then that total amount that we put into it is either at the end of the period when we decide that we're going to measure this, it's either been transferred on to the next department for continued work, or it's still here because we're still working on it. Does that make sense? Instead of thinking about cost, just think about like the physical stuff that you're working on. If I'm putting labor and materials into something, it's either done all the way and then I transfer it to the next department so they can work on it, or I'm still in the middle of working on it. There's always some line drawn, right? At the end of the workday, I'm going to have the stuff I moved on, and then the stuff that I'm still working on, and tomorrow I'll start working on it again. Okay? Until it's done, and then I'll pass it forward. So that's an important assumption underlying all this. Total cost incurred equals the total cost transferred plus the cost of anything remaining. All right. So the equivalent units of production measures the amount of materials added to or work done on partially completed units during a period. And it's expressed in terms of fully completed units. So we go back. So this stuff right here that's still sitting in Department 1 at the end of the period might be partially done. Okay? Maybe we put 50% of the labor into it that we're going to put into it, and 70% of the materials into it that we're going to put into it in this department. So the idea is if I were just to assume that those were undone, or to assume that they were completely done, I wouldn't be making a good assumption as to the amount I have sitting there. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some calculation to calculate the equivalent units of completed products so that when we do our calculations, we'll have a good estimate. Okay, that's the idea behind equivalent units of production. It's expressed in terms of fully complete units, even though they're partially complete. So I have something that's 70, it's easy if there's only one process, like only materials. And I can say it's 70% complete, so I would just take the number. If there was 100 of them that were 70% complete, I'd say I have 70 equivalent units sitting there. Okay, even though there's 100 units, which is 70% complete. Where it becomes challenging is when, well, we have 70% of the materials put into it, but only 50% of the labor. How do I calculate that? Okay. All right, so our conversion costs are our direct labor. We know that. Let's see. So let's see, simplify accounting direct labor is combined with manufacturing overhead, and this is called our conversion cost, or the cost of converting the raw materials into finished goods. That's why it's conversion cost, okay? Conversion cost is the cost of, oh, that's what it is. All right. So that's the concept of the equivalent units of production. So here we'll see it kind of in action when we prepare a production cost report using the weighted average method. All right, so we talked about the flow of costs. So this is a company that makes puzzles. So the direct materials are cardboard, pictures, and glue. Their direct labor is the workers operating the pressing machines that probably cut that into shape or whatever. And the manufacturing overhead is the maintenance and depreciation on the pressing machines. That's assembly. Oh, so the pressing machine probably just puts the picture on and presses it down into the cardboard, right? They glue it and press it down. Then it goes to the cutting process. And the direct material there in the box. The workers operating the cutting machines are direct labor, and the maintenance and depreciation on the cutting machines is the manufacturing overhead. Okay, so we start with cardboard, pictures, and glue. We glue a picture on there, we press it, we pass it on to cutting. They have a cutting machine that cuts it out into the jigsaw puzzle shapes, and they box them. That's their process. So production cost report shows how the costs flow through. Okay. You can read the 4 points there. That's what a production cost report does. All right. So these are important. So we always use the terms to account for and accounted for. Okay? If you think about it, to account for means any amount that I had there in the beginning of the process, plus any amount I've added in. That's my amount of stuff I have to account for. And that has to equal accounted for, which would be the stuff that's still sitting there, plus the stuff that I shipped out. Makes sense? It's just like inventory. When we use in accounting 1, when we try to figure out inventory, you would say inventory is the amount of beginning inventory plus any purchases of inventory less the cost of goods sold, less the amount of inventory I have left. Right? Same idea. All right. So here's how we create a production cost report. This is for the assembly department. Step 1 is we look at our physical flow of the actual units. So you see it's broken into units to account for and units accounted for. Units to account for, in this case, their beginning work in process was 0, and they started production on 50,000 units for the period. That means they have to account for 50,000 units. And then the units accounted for are completed and transferred out units. They completed and transferred out 40,000 to the next department. And their ending work in process was 10,000, so they've accounted for 50,000. That's all we mean, okay? That what we started with, the beginning, plus anything we started working on, that's our total units to account for, that has to equal the number we transferred out, plus any that are still remaining there at the end, every time. Step 2 is to figure out our equivalent units of production. So here we'll see, out of the units that we accounted for, 50,000 of them, okay? So we have 40,000 units that we transferred out. Transferred out units are always completely a one-for-one equivalent unit of production. Why? Because it's completely done. So that each unit that is completely finished is one equivalent unit of production. So that's easy, okay? Completed transfer out is always the same. So we transfer out 40,000 of them, and our direct materials is 40,000 of our units of direct materials and 40,000 units of conversion costs. Where the equivalent units of production come in is on the ending work in process units. We'll see here that the direct materials have all been put into the 10,000 units that are still in process. And the work in process units, we have 2,500 of the 10,000. That means 1/4 of the conversion costs have been applied at this point And we still expect 3/4 of the conversion cost to be applied, I guess, tomorrow when we work on them again. Okay? So this is the idea behind equivalent units of production. So here, we have 50,000 units accounted for as it relates to direct materials, and only 42,500 as it relates to conversion costs. Why? Because the units sitting there in inventory as in process are not fully complete. Okay? There's still process to be done on them before we can transfer them out. All right. Step 3, our costs to account for. So what we did here, it's the same concept, okay? We have a beginning working process of $0. We added 140,000, but in a problem, I want you to think about this, in a problem, all this information has to be given to you. There's no way for you to calculate how much they spent on this unless it tells you spent $140,000 in direct materials, okay? So don't worry too much about this. This is mostly like they're going to give you the information, and then they're going to ask you to put it in this format. And you can do that when you're looking at the format and saying, okay, in this case, it will get used to the format. So they said it spent $140,000 in costs added during the period. So that's the total cost to account for. And then they divide that by the equivalent units of production. So they have 50,000 equivalent units of production. That gives them a cost per equivalent unit. This is where you start to get information that's really useful to you. Okay, it costs me $2.80 in direct materials per unit. They do the same for conversion costs. Remember, conversion cost is our direct labor, a portion of our direct labor, and our overhead. So here they spent $68,000 in conversion costs. They had 42,500 equivalent units. That was the 40,000 units that were moved on to the next department, plus the 10,000 units that were 25% done. Okay, so that 42,500 equivalent units. So you, again, you take the total cost divided by the equivalent units, and that gives you a cost per unit, and then total. So right here, you know that this is costing you $4.40 per unit just in this one department. Again, I work with businesses all the time that say to me, I just don't know why I'm losing money. In fact, we sold more of this period than we did last period, and we lost more money. And that's when you say, you don't fully understand your costs. I'll say, what do you base your price on? And they say, well, my competitors sell them for $8 a piece. And if they're costing you $8.75 to make. So of course, if you're losing 75 cents on one, then every time when you sell more, you're losing more money, right? And that's just basic math. But they don't think of it in those terms. They think, if I don't meet the competitor's price, I'm screwed. I think the only thing worse than not meeting your competitor's price is selling it for less than it costs you. At which point, your only options are to try a marketing campaign to sell your product as a premium product, meaning you want to pay more than the competitors charge you because this product's better, or to find some way to cut the production costs if you really insist on selling it at that cost, at that price, right? So that's why it's so important. You would be amazed at the number of businesses, even big businesses, that have no even clue what it's costing them to make their product. Over and over. I mean, I see this. You can make a whole career in consulting just in going in and helping people understand their costs, control their costs, and setting their pricing appropriately. All right. Step 4, we have our costs accounted for. So we have our units completed and transferred out. Now we know the number of units. Now we know the cost of those units. And then we have our ending work in process. The cost of those that are still sitting there. Same with conversion costs and total. Okay. Again, I know that I'm kind of explaining something that's a little abstract to your brain right now. But as you look at it, you'll realize so much of this information is given to you. It's mostly a matter of understanding the format of this. The only thing that gets a little confusing is the equivalent units of production, because it won't just give you a number. It'll say something like you have 1,000 units still sitting in work in process inventory, and they're 30% complete. And you'll have to calculate 1,000 times 30%. And sometimes people get confused on which number do I apply that 30% to. But I don't think this is a particularly hard chapter compared to even the last chapter. I think this is easier. So, all right. So again, the cost of materials from the assembly department are then transferred to the cutting department. So remember, this was just the first department. So what becomes finished in the one department becomes the new working process in the next department. So the weighted average method combines the average cost of the equivalent units of production by combining beginning inventory costs with the current period costs. Again, that's a confusing way of just saying we're adding the costs as we go along. Okay? Don't let it confuse you. I think the term is confusing. The idea is, you remember when we learned about inventory and accounting 1, and the question was in a merchandising operation, if I'm selling some goods, which goods am I selling? Am I selling the ones that I bought just this week, or am I selling the ones that I bought a year ago? And so there was all these different methods of dealing with that. You could do the first in, first out method, assuming the first units that we purchased are the first units we sold, or the last in, first out, or the weighted average, saying, well, we're just going to, each time we add units, we'll add their cost, and then we'll divide by the number of units we have, and that'll give us a weighted average cost per unit. Okay? So all it means when they call it weighted average here is the same idea, that we're figuring out the cost per unit, and as we produce the units, we're always averaging that, which means we're taking the total divided by our total cost, and it gives us an average. That's all it means. You can do it first in, first out. But again, that's hard to do in these process-based systems when you're producing millions and millions of units. To sit there and say, okay, I'm keeping track of which ones came off the line first and which ones came off last. Instead of just saying, look, I know we produced 1 million units, I know our total cost is this, divide it, that's an average cost. Okay? All right, so the second process department, they go through the same thing. Step 1, physical flow of units. They had 5,000 beginning working process units. Again, that's given to us in a problem. They transferred in 40,000, which matches up, if you remember from the last department, the amount they transferred out. So they have 45,000 units to account for. Then they completed and transferred out 38,000 units, leaving them 7,000 units still in process in the department, total 45,000, which always has to match. Step 2 is the equivalent units of production. Again, this is information given to you in a problem. So again, remember that the equivalent units for transfer out units are always equal the number of units. Right? If we transfer them out, then they've had 100% of their direct materials applied or used in making them, and 100% of the conversion costs applied. Because they're done, and we're transferring them out. But we'll see here that for their ending working process, of the 7,000 units, they haven't applied any of the direct materials yet. Apparently, maybe, if you remember this company, their only direct material in this department was the box. So it's probably the last thing they do, right? They cut it, then they box it. So if it's still in the process of being cut, it hasn't been boxed, so they haven't applied any of their direct materials yet. Their conversion costs are $2,100, which represents 30% of the total cost. So they've gone through 30% of their conversion process. So that's, again, how they calculate the equivalent units. So equivalent units are always expressed in regards to direct materials and in regards to conversion separately. So they have 38,000 total equivalent units with respect to direct materials, 40,100 equivalent units with respect to conversion costs. That comes into play when we account for the costs. You can see they transferred in. They had $22,000 worth sitting there. Just to show you back here again. So they had 5,000 units, which represent $22,000 worth of cost. They transferred in another 176,000, so that gives them the amount transferred in. Direct materials. They had 0 in beginning, and then they added another 19,000. Conversion costs, they had 1,200 in the beginning, added another 14,840, gives them a total cost. Then the last thing is, take those amounts, divide them by the number of equivalent units to get a per unit cost. And actually the last thing is then do the cost accounted for. Okay? So that's the process. So then we need to know, well, what journal entries do I do? So think of the series of journal entries that are going to happen. I'm going to have this inventory account. What were their two, they had, I forget what the first one was called, but they pressed them or whatever. So we're going to have a work in process, whatever that account was called, pressing or something like that. What was it? No, that was the second one, was it? And then they're going to have a work in process, cutting, even though that's like cutting and boxing actually. But again, when you go in and you like start working as a manager or accountant with companies, you have to get it, like the first thing you really need to do is just get accustomed to like their nomenclature, all the names they use for their departments and stuff, and what happens in those departments. Because sometimes it's logical, but other times it's like, you're like, well, how do you call it this department? I don't know, we've always called it that. And that's just like, I mean, I remember going into a business once, and they could not keep these two accounts straight. There were two checking accounts, and they would like always post entries to the wrong checking account and stuff. And I finally, and they were calling them like by their account number, Chase Bank account number, whatever. And they would always make these errors. And I finally said, you need to change things to your account. Like, what do you call it day to day? Do you call it Chase checking account number 2540867312? No, I called it the green account and the blue account. Because that one has a green checkbook and that one has a blue checkbook. Perfect. Right? Let's call it what you call it day to day. So sometimes as an accountant, you come in and you have to realize that the green checking account and the blue checking account, they might have a red and an orange checkbook cover now. But when they first started, that one had a green account checkbook cover and that one had a blue. And you just have to kind of like go with it. You know, no one likes a guy that comes in and tries to change everything on day one. After a year or so, then you can start to say, why do you still call me this? But on day one, sometimes you just have to go with the flow. So you learn their process. So if you think about it, I'm going to have a raw materials account. And so what's going to happen is, if I take raw materials out of raw materials, I'm going to credit that account, and I'm going to debit work in process over here. That would be one of the journal entries, right? Then I'm also going to put some direct labor into here. So when I do direct labor, everybody is thinking, well, somebody works, so there's got to be a salary expense involved here. But there never is with direct labor. Because direct labor is going to become part of an expense later called cost of goods sold. Okay? So direct labor is either a credit or a reduction to cash if we paid our people right then, which is rare, and a debit to work in process. More often, it's a credit to salaries payable, salaries payable, which is liability account, and a debit to work in process. Okay? So that's how, and then, so we'll put that there, and at the end we'll have some balance. And then, when we transfer it over, we're going to credit this account for the amount of that balance, and we're going to debit here. Right? That's the transferring it from one inventory account to the other, and so forth. And it doesn't matter if they have 2 process departments or if they have 100. The same flow occurs that we add in direct materials and direct labor, and then we'll probably apply some overhead, maybe, depends on the business, and then transfer that over. Others wait and they apply overhead all at once at the end. Okay? So it depends on their situation. So again, they use these 4 steps, the 4 A's: accumulate, assign, allocate, adjust. That might be helpful for some people to remember. They flow from one work in process inventory account to the next, and eventually to finished goods, and then cost of goods sold. So they purchase raw materials. So the journal entry is raw materials debits or increases, and accounts payable credits or increases. Then during July, the direct materials are assigned to the 2 production departments, $140,000 to assembly, that's what they call it, assembly. And $19,000 to the cutting department. $2,000 in indirect materials are accumulated manufacturing overhead. So, how do they report that? A debit to work in process inventory assembly of $140, a debit to work in process inventory cutting, $19, a debit to manufacturing overhead, $2,000. Raw materials are credited, $161,000. So here they're using the term materials. Direct materials are assigned to work in process. Indirect materials are accumulated to manufacturing overhead. Because eventually that manufacturing overhead will be assigned. Okay, that's their terms. During the month, Pulsamy incurred $20,000 in direct labor costs in the assembly department, $38.40 in direct labor in the cutting department, and $1,500 in direct labor manufacturing overhead. So, we debit the work in process inventory assembly $20,000, work in process inventory cutting $38.40, manufacturing overhead $1,500, and then we credit wages payable. This is the one that seems like it confused people in the last chapter because they're always wanting to do a salary expense in there somewhere. But remember, salary expense is only for periodic salary expenses, like the sales staff. Any production salaries are going to get included into the inventory accounts. We're kind of folding the labor costs into the inventory accounts. In addition to direct materials and direct labor, Pulsamy incurred $35,000 in machinery depreciation and $20,000 in indirect costs that were paid in cash. So our manufacturing overhead is debited $35,000, and accumulated depreciation was credited $35,000. We accumulated that in overhead, and our manufacturing overhead is debited $20,000, and our cash is credited $20,000, and we've accumulated that to overhead as well. Then they use a predetermined overhead allocation rate to allocate indirect costs to the departments. $48,000 to the assembly department, $11,000 to the cutting department. So they debit work in process inventory, $48,000. They debit work in process inventory for the cutting department, $11,000. And they credit manufacturing overhead, $59,000, to allocate that work in process inventory. Just like in the last chapter, you came up with some predetermined overhead rate based on some factor that they will tell you in the problem. You figure out the amount of overhead, and then you apply it and allocate it to each of the work in process accounts. Then in July, when the production cost report for our assembly department was prepared, Pulsamy assigned $176,000 to the 40,000 units transferred from the department. So work in process inventory cutting is debited $176,000, and then work in process inventory assembly is credited. So we're reducing the assembly department, that's the one we just finished, and we're increasing the cutting department, that's the new department we're transferring to. At the end of July, when the production cost report for the cutting department was prepared, Pulsamy assigned $201,400 to the 38,000 units transferred from the cutting department to finished goods. So again, finished goods inventory increases, work in process inventory cutting decreases. It's just being moved from one department to the next. Finally, they're going to sell some, and when they sell it, remember there's always this issue of the selling price, the retail price, and then the cost. So they sold 35,000 puzzles, and they sold them for $8 a piece, which is 35,000 for $8, which is 208,000. So their accounts receivable increases by 208,000, and their revenue increases by 208,000. But then a second entry is required to record the cost situation, and that is the cost was $530 per puzzle, and it's 35,000, 185,500. The cost of goods sold increases by 185,500, and the finished goods inventory decreases or goes down by that amount. The more you work with it, the more the flow starts to seem logical. At first, it's just new. Okay? And then they do the adjustment for manufacturing overhead. Remember where you compare the amount you actually spent versus the amount that you came up with your allocation rate. And in this case, they find that their actual costs were $58,500, and their allocated costs were $59,000. So they do an adjustment, $500 debit to manufacturing overhead, to bring that in line, and a $500 credit to cost of goods sold. That adjustment we do at the end to bring manufacturing overhead in line always goes directly to cost of goods sold. And that's it. The last thing is the production cost report.